Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of the Red Line podcast. And today I have the pleasure of having Moeed Amin on the show, somebody who I look up to massively in a number of different ways. And I think it's just because he has a very different approach. I think the main thing that really shows Moeed's credibility is his knowledge around neuroscience. So I've invited him here today. Like I said, there's people in my life or in my life many, many years ago that didn't have the tools to get to where they wanted to be. And this is that platform to give that. So Moeed, we'll start off with who are you, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Yeah, thank you, Shane, and that was a really humbling introduction, and really appreciate it. It's great to be on the show, right? So, so who am I? What do I do? So, I'm involved. Well, I teach people the science of persuasion, and in the wider circle, I call myself a neural strategist. So, what does that actually mean? It means that anytime that there is a human-to-human interaction of some kind, sometimes that can be direct human to human. Sometimes that can be human to software to human, right? There's sometimes there's a medium involved. But anytime that there's a human to human interaction, there is ultimately a form of relationship, and underpinning that relationship is communication. And if you're going to, if you're going to desire for someone to take action, there's an element of persuasion within that communication. And so neurostrategy is involved in the classic elements of sales, which is a big part of my work with a lot of companies, right? So it's the science of persuasion, the science of sales. How do people make decisions? What's the neuroscience and psychology behind that? And what does that mean to how you need to adapt your sales process? But it doesn't just go there, it goes beyond that. So I work with companies that, have this challenge, which is, look, how do we get more clients? How do we increase the adoption rate of our products, for example, with our clients? We sell the products to our clients. When they use it, they absolutely love it. But the problem is only 30% of the desired client base actually use the product. And, all the investments they made in customer success management and onboarding and support systems and all, that's just not worked. And I'm like, well, there's a reason why that doesn't work. It's because you haven't built a human habit in there. You haven't built the fundamentals of habit for people to actually use your product. So we would use neurostrategy for that. If you work for a small company or challenger business and you're trying to hire great talent and, convince them to move away from their high paying jobs with great benefits, etc., to come over to work for your company, how do you do that? So wherever there's a facet of the science of persuasion, that's what I do. And I train companies. I mostly work with founders of SMEs, and I work with individual salespeople. And so I'll train and coach them. And the big part is the coaching. And I'll coach them onto the fundamentals through my framework and the lattice work of frameworks that I have to help them from end to end. So whether that's cold calling all the way down to, how do you kind of close those deals and get those agreements and an agreement that's happy for everyone. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Well, it's a beautiful thing. I've taken a lot of value from it too. Now, why did you get into sales? You are a very, very intelligent man. I'm sure that you had big dreams when you were a young lad. What got you into sales of all professions?
Well, first thing is, sales is an intellectual game. It requires intelligence. It may not be the classic academic intelligence, but you've got to know business. And so, I would argue that, this notion that sales, if you're not intelligent enough, then go into sales. It's really not true. It's just a different type of intelligence. But how did I fall into it? Well, when I completed my neuroscience degree, I didn't really see myself being, a lab technician and a neuroscience researcher. Didn't really see myself going into the academic side of it either, right? So doing my master's and PhD and things like that. And, I just wanted to make money. And so I wasn't sure where to go. So I did a conversion to law. So I've got a degree in law as well. And I did the LPC. And did a little bit of law, but really didn't enjoy that either. And so while I was figuring things out, I kept seeing these job offers for sales, and I kept seeing the OTE and the bonuses. And I thought, wow, well, you know what? Let me try that for 2 years, build enough money and some experience, and then we can figure it out. And then, almost 20 years later, I'm still trying it. So that's kind of how I fell into it. And the interesting thing is
it
that,
makes sense.
during the financial crisis, that's where that's where it clicked for me in terms of the link between neuroscience and sales, and actually how powerful that can be. And so that helped me become the top salesperson in my company in 2009, when it was a very tough year. So I hit 297% of my target, and I got to go into the chairman's club. I was the top salesperson, and from there it's just continued. And so that's kind of how it was, like a lot of people, by accident, but it wasn't accident, it was a choice, but it ended up that choice was something that was right for me.
So there's an element of fulfillment that comes from you sitting or being in that chairman's club. What does that fulfillment feel like, and how can one identify that fulfillment if that's what they're chasing in their future?
So could you repeat the question again? Because the line cut out there for a second.
Yeah. So there's an element of fulfillment that you get when you enter the chairman's club. There's a feeling that comes from there. And that's what draws you towards consistently repeating certain behaviors and actions and habits to get that fulfillment over and over and again. So how would you identify that feeling of fulfillment at that moment when you went to the chairman's club and you wanted to stay there?
That's a really good question. How would I identify the fulfillment for when I got to that chairman's club? Are you asking me how would I describe how it felt and whether that was fulfilling, or are you asking me, did that fulfill my ambitions? Which are different questions.
Let's go with both. Let's go with both if you're okay with it.
I mean, at the end of the day, there was the basic element of recognition, right? Your brain is constantly scanning for feedback, and so you always want some form of validation from the world.
Yes.
And it's up to you to decide what information you do want validation from, and a lot of that's to do with your background, etc. But the way I first identified with that was the methods I used, and that I've been spending the next 50 or almost 20 years trying to perfect or improve. It's clear that it's working. The second thing was that I was surrounded by another, I can't remember how many, I think it might have, I want to say 20, but I think there was more because it was all the offices around the world. So they would pick, the top 5, I think it was, from all the offices. But I think it was around 20, 25 other salespeople like me, not including the managers and leaders. And being in that environment and seeing them outside of work and getting to know their character, that was fulfilling for me, because there was social validation that I had not made it, but that my hard work had delivered the results. Then there was the financial, right? Of course, I made a lot of money that year and continue to do so. But ultimately, where I felt that fulfillment was that I was mastering a craft. And for me, that was something that I had been searching for a long time, which was, what would my craft be? What was the set of skills and the competencies and the contribution that I would bring to the world and bring to my life and my family and the people that I care for? And so it was at that moment that I felt that I had found that craft, and and more importantly, I found a craft that I really, really enjoyed.
I think I've got a delay on my side.
So there were different layers to that fulfillment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
Give me 1 second. I don't know why.
So there was. So we're seeing delays on both sides, right?
Is it delaying on your side, Moeed?
Shane, yeah, you're delaying on my side.
I am, right? And you're delaying on my side. It's really annoying because it's usually perfect. Give me a sec. Because right now, I can hear you fine. So what I'll do is
Yeah, I'm looking. I just tested my internet and it's at 300 meg. So it sounds like either it's on your side or it could be something wrong with Riverside itself.
Yeah, I'm not wondering what it's doing. I know your side will be clear, but now it's fine. So let's see if we can run it. If we have to,
Yeah,
God forbid we have to do another one, I have no problem doing that. I think we'll get to finish it off, and it should be clear now. Are we clear
no
now?
worries.
All right, cool.
Yeah, it looks
So,
clear to me. Yeah.
all right, cool. So on that last bit that you was mentioning, that like I said, that fulfillment, there's the financial element of it, the recognition. I think for me, recognition was the one thing that drove me to stay in sales. Like, absolutely. Was there
Mm.
anything else that people should strive to achieve when they are in sales to get to that place quicker? What should they pay attention to? Is it your habits? Is it your skills? Is it your education? What do you think they should be playing on?
That's a really good question, Shane. So success is not just about, and this is my experience and experience of my mentors, one of whom was worth over 200 million pounds before he passed away. My observation is that success is not just about the skills or the competencies you acquire, but it's about the person you become. And you've got to become that new person in order to achieve that success. So again, there are different dimensions or different layers to it. Number one, you've got to have the right knowledge and skills. If you're going to,
I'm going to get out and get back in.
Okay.
All right. I'm back now. Are we good now?
Yeah. So it seems good to me.
All right, cool. All right. So do you want to finish that section off? That last little section off?
If you want to, do you want to ask the question? Do you want to ask the question again? So you're delaying on my side again, but it's weird. Anyway, if you want to ask the question and then
Okay.
I'll answer it.
So for salespeople that want to get into the game, they want to be the top seller. What should they be striving towards to get to that president's club? What should they be focusing on? And what I mean by that is it their behaviors? Is it their attitude? Is it the education? For you, from Moeed's side, what would you say they should pay attention to?
Yeah, really good question. So achieving those results is the result of doing all the right things. So you need to look at a few dimensions. Number one is knowledge and skills. And within that dimension, there are sub-elements to that. So do I know enough about, sales is a function of business. So you've got to understand business.
Yep.
So do I understand what drives business? Can I speak the language of business, which is finance, right? So, being able to read a financial statement and understand all the different parts of it, and what does it tell you in terms of the story about this company? So do you have that information? Do you know about the industry, both your industry as well as the industry of your buyers, right? So if I'm selling to a chemicals industry, there's a completely different set of forces that they are facing compared with selling to aerospace and defense, for example.
Yeah.
And so knowing the industry also tells you the reasons behind a lot of those decisions that those executives are having to take. So there's a set of knowledge and skills that you're going to need to have. And notice I haven't even talked about sales skills yet, right? But I would argue you've got to know about your buyer's world first before sales. And most people do it the other way around. Then there are some other knowledges and skills that knowledge and skills that you need to have. Things like communication skills, things like presentation, things like writing skills, right? So copywriting skills is incredibly important now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a top 10 skill in sales that wasn't there 5 years ago. And so we're all vying for attention. People's willingness to concentrate on something that you write is far less than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to get their attention really fast. So how do you structure your emails? How do you structure your articles, whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
So those skills. But you are right. There are some other elements that you will need to develop. So let's talk about characteristics. There are in my research, 7 characteristics to building trust with someone. Okay. And those characteristics are, authenticity, consistency, integrity, reliability. What was the other one? So guilt-worthiness, generosity, and agreeableness. So you've got to know what those things are, and you've got to know how you exhibit those things.
Quick one, Moeed. What's agreeableness?
Yeah.
I've never heard that
So
word. Agreeableness.
Agreeableness is, let's say you throw an objection to me, right? Let's use a sales example. You throw an objection to me and say, yeah, too expensive. The first thing that you would probably say, we're taught in sales to consider that as a knee-jerk objection, and it probably is, right? But what's the person telling you behind that? It's not that it's too expensive necessarily. It could be something like, I don't trust you yet, so I'm just going to use that term, too expensive. It could be that actually it's not that you're too expensive, it's that they just don't have the money yet, but they're not going to admit that to you.
Never.
Right? So they might say it's too expensive. It could be that actually all the money that they have right now is earmarked for other things, but they may not tell you that, so they'll use the word too expensive. And so it's not saying, sometimes we're taught in sales to say, how do you know it's too expensive? What are you comparing it with?
Yeah.
Right? Now, those are valid statements because it's absolutely true. How do you know it's expensive? What are you comparing it to? Right? If you're comparing me with someone else and we believe we're totally different to everyone else, well, then it's not really expensive because but the reality is that they are comparing you to something. And so being agreeable is almost saying, you know what? I can understand your position.
Okay.
I can understand your position in saying that it might be too expensive. Curious, what do you mean when you say too expensive? Is it because of lack of money? Are you comparing us with someone else? I'm curious as to how you are making that translation that it's too expensive. And so it's a little bit more agreeable. It's what I call stepping into the river of their world. If you are trying to, if you come across their river, which is their world, and you throw a dam in place, at some point that river's going to burst through that dam.
Absolutely.
But if you step into the water and flow with that river, which is them, you'll understand the temperature, the speed, the depth, how it's moving. And the more you understand about them, their river, the more you're going to be able to actually have a more constructive conversation with them and divert that river in a gentle way that makes them appreciate your work. So that's what I mean by agreeableness.
That's an incredible way to put it. Honestly, that's a great way. We're gonna have to section that one out. So there's a few words that, for some reason, Moeed, that have stuck in my mind, and they're your words. Okay, we had a conversation about 4 months ago. I was sharing a few problems I had and a few decisions I had to make, and some of those decisions were good decisions. Some of them were very, very life changing. But you said, correct me, but you said, I went through the same, Shane, and I was forged through the fire. How did you say it? Forged through the fire or forged through the flame or something?
Yeah.
How did you say that?
Yeah, I was forged by fire. Yeah.
That's it. So that, and every time I was going through like a massive, massive thing in my life, like a big problem, your voice was in my head and you said, and I've done that. And that's what's made me here. That's what's made me who I am today. And that's how we transition into the next piece on failure. And the reason I heard those words was because I was experiencing failure in many different ways, many different ways. I think one of my biggest failures recently to date is not being empathetic and not understanding people well enough, understanding their worlds well enough to realize what they're going through. And even though I'm going through pain and I'm struggling and I think the whole world is crashing down on me, I failed to put myself in other people's shoes and just kind of, and everybody sees it, look at it from their world, put yourself in their shoes. But I never really did it. And God's honest truth, from February to April, my entire business just went right down. And that was because I lacked that. That's a massive failure that I'm always going to learn from. And I'm sure you've had a number of failures in your life. So what was the most profound, memorable failure you went through personally, career-wise? And it's helped define the character that presents Moeed today.
So the first thing that we need to, let's acknowledge that, what you just shared is, it's not an easy thing to share. So it's amazing that you were able to do that. The first thing I would say before I answer that question, and this is a really important point, words give meaning, right? And the way we interpret the world around us is not just feelings, it's also words, right? And words kind of precede thought. So if you say, I try to avoid the use of the word failure. And the reason why I avoid the use of failure and success, by the way, so I avoid both, is because they are finite words. They are words that I would argue you should use to assess your life when you're at the end of it. But if you say failure, there is a connotation of finality in it. And so the words that I use instead of failure, I would use setback. Because a setback, the way I interpret the word setback is, it's a moment in time. It's a temporary situation. And there is a way to come back from it. Hey.
Back in. Sorry, this is, I believe it's the internet connection at this Airbnb. But you said the last piece we were on was successes and failures, and the reason why you don't use success and you don't use failure?
Yeah, so I don't use the terms success or failure because they're finite terms. They denote this meaning that there's nothing you can do about it. And like I said, it should be things that you probably assess your life when it's over. And even then, you have to be careful about that. But anyway, the words I use are, instead of failure, it's setback. Setback denotes that it's temporary, right? It's something that you can come back from, right? There is a way around that. And I don't use the word success. I use the word progress, right? Because no one is the finished article. You can say you've made it, but then what happens after, right? And so there should always be continuous progress. That's the aim of the game. It's not winning and losing necessarily. It's continued progress. To answer your question directly now, one of the biggest failures for me was not getting together with my two best friends and investing in the real estate market in the UK in the early 2000s. It's one of the things that I failed to take advantage of, and I really should have, and I kicked myself for it. So I got into the real estate game a lot later than I should have. And I would have made a lot more money back then if I did. How does that help me? Well, it's made me appreciate the value of opportunity a lot more. And so the way I approach my day, the way I approach my time, the way I also approach my conversations with others is that regret. People, there's always something that people regret.
Of course.
And it's a powerful emotion. And how I approach that with sales is, well, what would this person regret? If there are certain actions that they didn't take, what would they regret? And for each person is different. Some people, they regret, not spending time with their family and spending more time at work, in which case my sales conversation will be very different. For some people, it's the regret of a bad action, or the regret of inaction, or the regret that they took a decision that was too risky, and they're all about certainty. So it has impacted the way I view how other people view regret. So that's one way that it's helped me. The other one is that I promised myself that it's changed the way I deal with my finances. Right? It took a few years.
Okay.
But the way I view money and the way I view my finances and the value I place on things has shifted since then. So it was probably something that was good for me to go through. But it's certainly enhanced the way I, all the conversations I have in sales, no doubt, because I'm always thinking, what is it? Not just what does this person want, but what would this person regret? Right?
Yeah.
What is it they regret at the moment in their work? And that's the other side of the coin that I probably would have neglected, or it would have taken me longer to appreciate if I hadn't gone through that experience. So I don't know if that answers your question, Shane, but yeah, that's my kind of biggest setback.
It always does. And one thing you said about that on how you view finances, because I am an absolute catastrophe when it comes to finances, just absolutely awful. How can you, so for someone like me even, how should they perceive money? If you were to give them one way of looking at it, just one way, no variations, no bias, what's one way they can look at money to value it in the right way, not abuse it, not get abused by it, not overspend? How can they think logically, calculated about money without having to do too much thinking? How would you advise them or recommend they do that?
Firstly, I would say that there are other people that are far more qualified to talk about money than me. And so I can only give from my perspective here.
Yeah.
But first thing is, money isn't real. Right? So let me repeat that. Money isn't real. It's not like gold. It's not a fundamental law of physics. It's not like trees and grass and animals and things like that. It's not real, which means that it's been shaped by people. So that's the first thing you've got to really understand about money. It doesn't exist really. Even gold, if we grew up in a society where gold was not considered precious, could it be used as an exchange of value? No, because if it's not considered precious. So that's the core point here. It's the perception and consideration of value, and money is the energetic exchange of that. And so what you have to understand is that money moves from one person to the other when there's an exchange of value. And that value is perceptive as well. And so when you think about, that's how I think about money. And if not enough is coming to you, and I've been in that moments where not enough is coming to me, the simple answer is not enough people perceive me as valuable, and therefore that's why the exchange is not happening. So either it's I'm not giving enough value, or there's no perception, or both. And so that's
That's a
how I
great
would
way.
look at money at its fundamental basis.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I've never heard that before. Never heard that before. And another thing that I look at on accelerated learning, you've obviously went through failure. So the next thing is a learning experience, and a very impactful learning experience that, again, has helped shape your character today. One of my biggest learning experience was when I came to the UK and I was sitting around the table with my dad's friends, my mum's old friends. One of my dad's friends, his name is Sid. He's owns an SEO agency, software development, and everything. And my idol at that time was Grant Cardone, and his audacious out there, like, I'm the best in sales, claim it. And I was talking to him. He said, "What are you doing now, Shane?" And I said, "Well, I'm a part of this company. I'm the bestseller and everything." Da 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 da. And he said, "No, you're just fucking arrogant. You do not want to come across arrogant to people when you're in the business world." And as soon as I took that on and just sat there and shut up, and even my dad looked at me and he was like, "I'm not even going to say anything because you should really listen to this." I changed the entire way I approached people from that day on. In a very humbling way. I showed a lot more humility. I still can be obnoxious, but that was one of my biggest learning experiences. So, is there a learning experience that you can define or you can distinctively remember that has really, really helped you become, we're not going to use the word successful, but just helped you progress significantly until today or up until today?
There have been loads. But one that immediately comes to mind is quite early on in my sales career, I was having a conversation with a potential buyer. We had it was supposed to be a 45-minute conversation. 30 minutes into the conversation, the whole way through, the buyer was just barely responding to me. Very, very quip, direct answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was struggling to ask the questions, or at least I was struggling to get a response from him.
Mm-hmm.
30 minutes into the conversation, I don't know why I did this, but it was almost something that whispered inside me to do so. I ended the conversation. I said, can we just stop this conversation here, Jan? Jan, so it's a guy in, I think it was in the Nordics somewhere, for a telecoms company. I said, Jan, can we stop the conversation? I feel as if this conversation is not going to go anywhere. I'm struggling to, create engagement with you. I feel as if I've done something wrong here, or I'm not doing the right things in this conversation. Since you've given me 30 minutes of your time, you don't have to do this, but I clearly want to get better, and I'm clearly doing something wrong here. And you're the best person to tell me what that is and give me the feedback. Mm-hmm. Could I just ask you could just give me very honest feedback? Don't worry about my feelings. They will not get hurt. I will be more hurt if you aren't honest with me. What was I doing wrong during this conversation? What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Mm-hmm. And he proceeded to tell me very honestly where it was really bad. And then I asked him, okay, can you recall an example of a sales conversation that you had that was really, really good? Like, it was excellent. What was it that person did? And it was mostly the opposite of what I did, with a few other things. That experience started the 15-year journey then on, where I have now interviewed 428 B2B buyers across 10 industries, 9 functional responsibilities, 3 seniority levels, all the way up to C-level of large companies. Mm-hmm. And to my knowledge, it's the biggest live interview-based research in sales or into B2B buyers that I've ever heard of. This is not about, analyzing call recordings or sending out surveys and questionnaires. This is, one-on-one conversation with buyers. Sometimes formally structured conversations, sometimes informal, but all of which are about one thing, which is, how do you make decisions, and what are the things that you dislike and like about sales approaches or experiences that you've had. And so that experience then on that call and the journey afterwards has been an incredibly large contributing factor to the fundamental shift of how I approach sales at that beginning and how I've continued to progress. It's why I keep telling people, I actually had this conversation 3 weeks ago where one of the people I coach asked me and said, look, I'm not convinced that I need to know that much about the buyer. And I said, and I'll remove this person's name, obviously for confidentiality, but I said, well, tell me who has your money? Who has your money? Who's going to pay you your commission? Is it your company or is it your buyer? And he said, well, ultimately the buyer. I said, well, shouldn't you then know enough about that person that they will feel safe enough to give you their money? Doesn't that stand to reason? And he couldn't argue that fact. And then I also showed the results of that research that I've been doing and why, the things that really, really annoy the buyers. And it turns out that he was doing a lot of them. And I said, well, look, I didn't ask you about what you've been doing and therefore use that against you as part of my answer. I just told you exactly what all these buyers have been telling me. You're the one that's confirmed that's what you've been doing. And kudos to you for being honest about it, by the way. And so there's proof right there in that without knowing you, and it was our first conversation, without knowing you that well, I've been able to predict because of what these buyers have been telling me. And so you got to know your buyers. Now, there's an element of how much you need to know, and that depends on how important the buyer is, how much they're going to spend with you, the complexity, the impact of your product, all those things, right? But there's no getting away from the fact that you've got to know enough about them for you to have that relationship with them, right? So, that was the experience. There are a ton of experiences, by the way, that I went through that were profound. Loads of experiences, but that one sticks out for me right now from a great question you asked.
Okay. Now, here's the role play part. So we're going to go on a journey. We're going to take a time machine, back to the future, a little scenario. And you are going to be walking in the park and you're going to see this kid. He's going to be sitting there on the bench. I don't think you have a Walkman or a CD player yet. You definitely don't have an iPod. So you walk past this guy and you say, hey, how you doing? He says, hey, who are you? You say, hey, buddy, I'm you in however many years. I'm you in the future. Okay, so what is it that you want? I'm here to tell you one thing that you must do. This is the roadmap to success. What I tell you right now is going to get you to where you need to be in half the time. You're going to make half the mistakes, and you're going to be twice as successful. One thing only. What's the one thing you tell Mini Moeed to do, to focus on, to get those things done?
Yeah, how do you pick one thing? I think the one thing I would tell him is surround yourself with better quality people. I think that's what I would. I think that's what I would do, because one of the regrets I have is I wish I'd got a handle on my mind. There was a lot of stuff that I went through when I was young that had a profound and negative impact on me. And it took me more than 20 years to kind of get over that. And I still haven't, right? There's still residual elements of that.
Yeah.
So, my answer could have been seek counseling or seek help about that. But I think if I had surrounded myself with more, it doesn't mean I didn't have great quality people, but if I'd surrounded myself with more of that, they would have undoubtedly directed me to, or advised me to have to deal with that and figure out a way to deal with it and get help about it. But they also would have in turn helped me, understand maybe where I wanted to get to earlier. We would have learned from each other. We would have helped each other out. So I think surround yourself with high quality people. And I think I think that's the advice that I would give that 18-year-old self. Because, if I did do that, I no doubt that my life would have taken a 10-year shunt, a 10-year acceleration.
Wow. Well, look, that's very powerful. And the way we wrap up the show after all of this value is really, where can people find you, which is number one, which you can get to. But what I want people to go away from the show, every single episode that people watch, I want them to go away from the show and be able to execute on one thing, one strategy, one process, one system, one technology, one software that they can use today, whether it's free or paid. So in your world, I've seen you've got tons of videos on financial statements, which are dynamite. I've even spoken to older people now. I sat at a table yesterday, Moeed. God's honest truth, I was at a table for the first time in my life, and I told you I wanted to get out of telemarketing. I was at a table with a net worth of over $1 billion in money. And I know money doesn't exist, but that was a mind-blowing experience for me. And one of the persons, I brought up a conversation that you said about financial statements, and he was like, well, this kid's a little bit more than I expected. So that's from you. What is a growth hack? What is something the audience can take away from today, they can start using, and it can be a game changer? They can start realizing results in weeks, a month, but we want to get people going. So what would you suggest people start looking at or start doing today?
All the stuff that you said about the financial statements, etc., that all came about from it all funnels into one thing, which is the theme that I've been talking about throughout this conversation, actually, which is you've got to take the time to understand your customers and your craft.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't ask the right questions about them to understand them and yourself, and you've got then you're not really going to get to the right answers. There's a saying that I have, which is, how can I get you the questions to your answers? And that's what in my opinion, and from the feedback I get from all my clients, is what makes me such a great coach for them. It's about asking the right questions, right? The quality of the questions determine the quality of your life, and also how you act on them, of course. But I can't give you a hack, because it's not a hack. It's something that takes time, right? And you've got to build that knowledge. There's a saying that, where do they start about knowing about the customers?
Yeah, so where do they start? And then tell me the saying that you were about to say.
Yeah, I need to remember the saying now, because it's in Italian. It was said by Leonardo da Vinci. So where would they start? So there are some simple frameworks that I've created to help you do that. Number one, start with the industry, right? So what do I need to know about the buyer's industry? There's a fantastic framework called Porter's 5 Forces. Anyone that's in marketing will know it. Porter's 5 Forces tells you all the 5 forces that are acting within the industry, and it gives you an incredibly good picture of what's going on there. The good news is you could just Google Porter's 5 Forces and then the industry, and there are a ton of people that have already created that for you, actually. So get to know the industry. Number two is you've got to get to know the company. Now, you've got to understand the financial statements. It's the language of business. You've got to be able to speak the language, all that stuff. But also you want to know what their priorities are, what they're trying to do, get a bit, and a lot of salespeople say, well, I haven't got time to do that. And to which I say, okay, fine. There are only 3 things you need to know at a minimum. What products and services do they sell? Who do they sell it to? And how do they sell it? Right? Know those 3 things, and you're going to know, a big portion of what you need to. The next thing is you've got to know about the role that you're selling into, right? So chief revenue officer, chief R&D officer, CTO, CSO, CMO, the CRO, chief HR revenue, HR officer. What does that role entail, right? What are their MBOs? What are their responsibilities? What are the things they've got? What's the job to be done? That's what's really important here. So understand the job to be done. Because if you understand what that is, then you understand the priorities and you understand how you contribute to that. And then the final thing you want to know, which is the hardest, but also the most powerful. And when you get it, it ensures that you have far higher average order values and ensures that where other people are getting their clients canceling on them, yours is not. And that is knowing about them as human beings, right? What drives them, what their human needs are, their social, psychological profile, style, or whatever it might be, right? So understanding those things. So you kind of need to know those four things, but you've got to know about the buyer's world. And that isn't just about knowing about their role. It's about the business. It's about the finances. It's about all of those things that I just talked about. Notice I haven't talked about sales yet. I argue, and this is controversial, if you know enough about your buyers, there's very little need to understand sales, because you're going to have a far more constructive conversation. Doesn't mean you don't need to know about sales, etc. Of course you do. But what I'm saying is that 80% of those techniques you will find are not needed. And so that would be my hack, although there isn't really a hack, right? Even if you talk about questioning, Shane, people ask me about frameworks for questioning, and I have the frameworks. But actually, what makes questioning really powerful isn't the framework. It's the knowledge and the experience and the understanding that you have. Because if you have those three things, the questions you ask will become infinitely more powerful, because you're able to make assessments and judgments and context around some of the information the person's giving you. And so you can ask questions now. Okay, that I understand what you're saying there, James. When I'm looking at your business, because you're an industry with high operational gearing, that means if there's any reduction in revenue, that's going to have a massive impact on your profitability, which means it will impact your cash flow, etc. Because even if revenue goes down, you still have all these overheads that you've got to pay for, right? That's high operational gearing. Absolutely. Tell me about X, Y. And so you're able to have a much more constructive question. That is why people who are excellent at business and people who have more experience and good experience, it looks like magic, right? It looks like art, the way they ask questions. But actually, it's not the technique of the questions. It's the huge amount of knowledge that they've built. And so, read the Financial Times every day. Read The Economist. Read Political Affairs. Read those financial-based articles, information, and things like that. Read about the industry. Look at the Big Four and other consultancies, and what are they saying about industry trends. You've got to read those things on a daily basis, because you've got to become that professional. You can't just learn a few tactics and skills and things like that and expect to have a great conversation with the C-level person. That's a long answer to your question, and I probably violated it by not giving you just one. But it's really hard to just do that. But if I was to give one, I would say, you know what?
That's why I do it.
Yeah. Forget your product. Your buyer doesn't care. Like, your buyer couldn't care less about you and your product. They care about themselves. So learn about them, ask the right questions about them, and all of that will flow. What you need to know and do will flow.
Fully agree. Help them keep their reputation, make them credible, reduce their risk, and everything Moeed said. And you should be dynamite. Moeed, where can people find you? Where can people take advantage of your knowledge, your coaching, if they want to use you? How do they get in touch with you, Moeed? Did you get that? Did I come through? I said, how did they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So it didn't come through because it froze there. So how did they get in touch with me? So firstly, LinkedIn. So /Moeed Amin. I put out a ton of free content out there to help people. I give away a lot of my stuff for free to help people. So /Moeed Amin. You can also check out the website, which is proverbialdoor.com. And you can also look at our podcast and YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel is Proverbial Door. Our podcast is called Persuasion Lab. Again, ton of content out there to help you And as you said on the YouTube channel, there's all these interviews from incredible experts around the world, people who are the top in their field to help you become a better salesperson. And also there's about, I think something like 70 or 80, I can't remember how many financial analysis videos there. So we look at 70 companies, we've analyzed their finances to help you get better at it. So yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Moeed, thank you very much for showing up again today. I always appreciate it. Always a pleasure, never a chore. And I hope to see you back for another episode very, very soon. So I'm going to push stop. It's going to upload and then we can leave the call. That's it for today, guys. So I think we've got about